You switch it off. Okay, great. So thank you for this introduction, Robert-Jan, and thank you for inviting us both to talks about architecture and Air Rotterdam. It's really wonderful to be here today and share our work experiences. Most of them shaped, like Robert-Jan said, by 20 years of living and working in India. And more recently by moving back to the Netherlands. It's a wonderful group here, and I'm really looking forward to our work and presenting it to you, but certainly also with hearing from your questions later on and having a dialogue about our work in architecture in general. You know, our journey hasn't been very straightforward, I must say, right? And if anything, it's been like life. It's full of coincidences, unexpected turns, curiosity leading the way. And when we look back now, it's tempting to pretend it was all part of some beautifully orchestrated master plan, but of course that wasn't the case. It's somewhere in that messiness you do start to see some kind of a direction, and in a compass that keeps you nudging along. And it all started in Sri Lanka, actually, in the office of Geoffrey Bawa. And I heard somebody saying, yes, Geoffrey Bawa, but generally it's not an architect who is very well known around here. But definitely should be. And for the ones that are interested, next September at the Design Museum in Vitra in Basel, there's going to be a major retrospective exhibition of his work. And working there really changed everything for us. Here you see Kandelema. This was built in 1991. And his work really reinforced this idea that buildings can be both precise and poetic, deeply rooted in their place, but also quietly transformative. And that architecture doesn't have to impose itself on nature. You can see actually this very strong architectural intervention here in this tropical landscape. The architecture does twist and turn here a little bit, but nowhere does it do what it can do best. It is architecture, and nature, it allows it to improvise and adapt and surprise. Bawa's work wasn't about the spectacle, but architecture done in the right way, it can heighten our awareness of nature and place and time. And that, more than anything, became our foundation. So with that spirit, in 2006 we started Architecture BRIO in Mumbai. And over time, we began to see how those lessons from Bawa, from Delft and from Sept, where we both studied, started to surface in our own work. And almost unconsciously at first, but eventually became guiding principles for us in the diversity of the Indian context. Because working in India, it is intense. You have to imagine India not as a country, but actually as a continent, right? Geographically, it stretches all the way from the south of Italy to halfway Sweden. And just like in Europe, it comes with different climate zones, different geological strata, tropical coast, deserts, rainforests, snow-capped mountains. And you travel 200 kilometers and a new language is spoken, and there's a different food culture. Here you see in red dots the locations of our projects across India. You can see how it then spreads across this map of Europe as well. And then there's, of course, the other reality, the social one. And unlike the more, let's say, the sheltered stability of Europe, maybe not so much anymore, but India is confronting the realities of a globalized world with its increasing peaks and valleys of extreme wealth and poverty. And that means our projects range from a 6,000 square meter private home to a 30 square meter home. Or a public skate park in our neighborhood that we designed together with a group of architects. And every project throws up a new set of conditions. And we have to adapt. It's a constant negotiation with constraints and with people and with systems. But that diversity, that constant switching of positions, it trains you. It makes you flexible and it makes you agile. And it forces you to build relationships and weave stories between completely different worlds. Now, of course, this diversity is a problem, though, because how do you position yourself as an architect, right? Because we are not specialized in any particular fields. But we are specialized in kind of stepping into the unknown. So that's what we always tell potential clients when they come to us, right? When it's a completely new context or brief, we say we don't have the answer yet, right? But we do know that we will figure it out. And because of this, we don't come into a project with preconceived notions of what is the right way to build. So rather than seeing every project as a chance to kind of display our expertise or impose our knowledge, we see them as an opportunity to learn something new. So for example, here in Mandvi, we learned from an ancient shipbuilding techniques. And the result is always determined by its geography, the climate, the light, the people, the materials at hand. But I must say, that is definitely not the most efficient way to run a practice. We are a team of... Where is that? Yeah, there they are. We can continue. So we are a team of about 50 people in Mumbai, and we just complete about maybe 2 or 3 projects in a year. So Rotterdam, we're working here from the new institute, and then in Mumbai, we work from an old garment workshop, which we converted into a studio. And we inserted a tiny little courtyard here with a frangipani tree, a little wink to Geoffrey Bawa. And a lot of our projects sit in those fascinating in-between landscapes, places that are neither fully wild nor fully cultivated.
So one of the first projects where we really worked with this type of context is one we call the Riparian House. It's a project that quite literally asked how can a building both inhabit the landscape and disappear into it at the same time. The location of this project isn't far from Mumbai. It's a couple of hours drive, and it sits in this incredible landscape which is quite typical of the Western Ghats. The hills slowly drop into plains, and there are numerous rivers that wind their way down towards the bay. When our clients approached us, they wanted to build a weekend home here, but they were not the first to come up with that idea. And by then, the area was already filling up with a lot of villas, most of them very self-important Palladian villas on top of the hilltops, each trying to grab the best view. And we really did not want to add another one to that. And so we questioned if we should even build here, or if we could build something that is barely visible. We started here by locating the house just below the crest of the hill. And this roofline follows the contour so closely that from a distance you can barely tell that there's a building here. But from inside it opens out, you see the river below and the mountains in the distance. There's a courtyard in the center of the house, and you see that here in the diagram as well. So this courtyard connects the roof to the terrain. It flows outwards towards the river and the pool, and it connects the experience connects this continuous movement between the landscape and building. We designed a garden here which would make it impossible to tell what was planted new and what was the existing riparian landscape that existed here already. And this blended the house further into its surroundings. And then there's the element of the veranda, which you see often in our buildings and in Indian architecture. In India, this is not a luxury, it's survival. It's where you sit, eat, work, everything. And here we also wrapped it around in a bamboo screen. This added another layer to the house, which was otherwise made in concrete primarily. And it allows light to filter through, the breeze, and it also creates privacy where needed. So this house itself was meant to age. We didn't want it to stay pristine. The materials we chose, the concrete, stone, and bamboo, were chosen because they patinate and they absorb time. And for us, that was the poetry of it, that between this geometry and wilderness, and between what you draw and what nature does with it over time, the house doesn't resist this change. It kind of choreographs it. And it becomes a meditation, really, on time and on weathering and this beauty of impermanence. And then from here, we move to a different kind of landscape, which is also around Mumbai. It's a little bit different. It's on a coast across the bay from Mumbai in a place called Alibag. And the site itself is in a low-lying area. You see it here in red. And it's surrounded by paddy fields, which constantly flood in the monsoons. And this is a satellite map of Mumbai. And the areas in red show what is predicted to be below the tide line in 2050. And that's where our site is located. So avoiding building along the coast isn't realistic because India has a large coastline of 7,500 kilometers, and about 43% of its 1.3 billion people live in this zone. They all live and work and depend on the coast. And so the question became, is it possible to build here in a way that the buildings are future ready and then they can accommodate these rising sea levels? And we started working here on what became the Mumbai Artist Retreat, which was to create a space to create a place for artists to come and live, work, think without the noise of the city. And it became an art lab of sort where art, ecology, and community overlapped. We started by placing a water harvesting pond in the center, and then placed a few simple structures in palm plantation, pavilions, cabins, and workshops. The main structure here is a 12 by 9 meter shed, and it's inspired by the Sri Lankan Ambalama, which is basically a public resting pavilion. It's over 200 years old, this structure, and historically travelers would stop here, talk, rest, and share news. And we loved the sense of openness and community that this stood for. The whole thing balances on 4 boulders, which are meticulously leveled on this slightly undulating rock surface. The steel frame in our project is bolted and not welded. And this is so that it can be dismantled and moved someday if needed. The roof is made of bamboo poles and it's tied together with cotton rope, and it's very lightweight. We added solar panels on top along with a large skylight that draws the hot air out and acts as a natural ventilation stack. The idea was to keep it as self-sufficient as possible. And here you see how the solar panels were integrated into the design of the roof and a view of the same from above. So because we had to follow strict coastal regulations, most of the parts were prefabricated off-site, and everything came to site as a kit. The decision, which was initially partly driven by the desire to be both climate resilient and also because of regulation, became part of the design philosophy. And then we designed timber screens that could be moved around, allowing the structure to be modulated and more open or closed. It's a project that's built for flexibility in how it lives today and where it might live tomorrow. And now we move to a very different geography. We move north. to the mountains. This one took time, 7 years actually. It's a small boutique homestay which overlooks this incredible mountain range. And I don't think when we started, any of us anticipated how long and humbling this journey would be for us. But 7 years is nothing compared to the 50 million years that it took to shape these incredible mountains. And the land here is full of this type of rock called schist, which is a silvery layered stone. And you see here what was once the bottom of an ocean. And if you hold a piece of this rock in your hand, you're holding a geological timeline. So for us, it was very obvious that this should be the material that the house is made of, and that the house should be sculpted from this rock. This wasn't an easy choice because the stone was quarried from the site itself, block by this team of elderly masons. And most of them were over 50, very incredible craftsmen working patiently and precisely. And watching them work was like watching a language that's slowly disappearing. And at the same time, we were very conscious not to romanticize this, because we were not trying to use craft for craft's sake. It just made sense here, because if you have, why haul up cement, sand, and steel on winding mountain roads from the city below, when the perfect building material is right there below you on the ground that you stand on. And this tradition of building is right here to see, which this is a cow shed that was built by the British, which is very close by to our site. And but in the Himalayas today, everyone builds like this because they feel like building in concrete and glass is modern and it's aspirational. This house does the opposite of that. It reaffirms that local materials and logic can be contemporary and deeply rooted. You see from this construction picture that the walls are thick, they are load-bearing, and they are hand-laid. We made the roofs out of standing seam metal, which is a technique that was brought to this region by the British and then reinterpreted here. It's made of pine and copper. The pine here was from the local forest. The copper had to be imported from Sweden. And then the roof was folded on side by this team of South Indian craftsmen led by this French specialist who lives in Auroville. And it became this amazing collaboration between foreign and local, between old and new, all meeting on this mountainside. And because of that, the result feels both modern and ancient at the same time. The sliding windows in this living room open up entirely, connecting the indoor living space to the outdoor deck. And the railing is absent because we did not want to block the views of the mountains, but there's a hammock net beyond the deck that acts as the safety guard. And then in the master bedroom as well, the windows completely slide into the wall, and the bedroom becomes 3 times the size when the windows are open. Oh, yeah. So the house was embedded into the terrain, and it was literally carved into the slope. The roofs merge with this direction of the contours, and on the south side it's slightly lifted up to allow the winter sun to enter. When you look at the house from above, yeah, this is glitching, right? Yeah, when you see the house from above, they look like lines in the which are along the contours, and you don't see a prominent building there. And these walls seem to grow out of the terrain, sometimes as a water harvesting pond, like here, or sometimes a roof terrace with the timber roofs then hovering over the walls and framing those amazing views of the mountains beyond. Sometimes it's hard to tell where the building ends and the mountains begin, and I think that was kind of the point of it. When we talk about local architecture, this project really made us think about what that even means today. And restricting ourselves to only using local and traditional techniques prevents us from innovating. Local just isn't about, it's not only about geography, it's also about attitude and appropriateness, about resourcefulness and respect. So this house sits somewhere between modern and traditional, between luxury and austerity, and between permanence and change. So we come back to the Mumbai coast, and we were very nervous about this project initially. The clients call this project Dua Villa, and Dua in Hindi means blessing. When we first met the clients, it was in their swanky South Mumbai penthouse with gorgeous views of the city, and we immediately noticed how shiny and polished everything in their house was. They had ornate golden taps in their bathrooms and a lot of expensive art on the walls. And we knew that budget was not going to be a problem here, but perhaps taste was. And then the size, that also surprised us because they requested for a 1,500 square meter weekend home, which in conversations became 2,200 square meters. But they were the most wonderful people, and we went ahead with the project because there was one key ingredient that was there, and that's trust. With the private client, we found over the years that this is an essential factor for a successful project. And then with that trust, we managed to turn this project around. In India, we are very used to working with dramatic sites, some of which you have seen, with views to respond to, or an interesting topography, or features like streams or rivers or lakes. But this site had none of that. There were no features to respond to. There were no trees. There were a few trees and no views to look at. And so the challenge became, can we build serenity from scratch? And can we create a sense of retreat just through proportion, craft, and light? And we began with restraint. We wanted to see what happens when architecture turns inwards and when it's not about the view or the grand gesture, but it is about proportion and light and material. And so the reflections and the lights coming through the skylight, they change through the day and they animate the space below, and they make moving through the house more experiential. We chose a very pared down material palette. There's a sand-faced plaster that you see here on the exterior, which has a slight graininess to it. There's a more polished lime plaster on the inside, which is like a living, breathing wall, which changes color and the feeling through the seasons. We used a natural limestone for the flooring and also terrazzo in places. And we used teak wood for our doors here, and we used brass for the windows. The overall feeling is monastic, minimal, and meditative. Instead of fighting the size, we embraced it. We took the 3x3 grid of a traditional Vastu home, and Vastu is a traditional Indian design philosophy that is believed to align buildings with natural energies to promote balance and well-being. And a lot of our clients believe in this. Then we subdivided this 3x3 grid by a factor of 3, starting with 91 spaces. And then the divisions shifted, creating a variety of spaces. Some got merged and some got further subdivided, and the spaces largely unfold around 2 courtyards and 2 axi, one after another. in a very calm, deliberate sequence. And in the end, a labyrinth emerged. And then we softened the outer edge and the facade of the building by creating a scalloped facade. And here you see the final plan of the house. We finished constructing this project in 19 months. And yes, sometimes construction can go fast in India as well. And we got a bit obsessed with the making of things here. We customized every little detail, like the door, the main door here, and the door handle. With our team, a team of carpenters, we custom designed arch doors in brass, and along with that, all the handles, hinges, and these strike plates. And then these large barn doors, as we call them, required special heavy-duty hinges for them to open 180 degrees. We made these, and we incorporated a delicate fluting detail in that to mirror this arched facade. The overflow gutter of the pool is crafted in solid marble, which is made of blocks of 2 meters by about half a meter. And we spent months prototyping, refining, and testing this. And the making became part of the design process. Of course, this project is grand, but it's not luxurious in the conventional sense. It's a different kind of luxury. It is a luxury of slowness, of care, and of presence. And to us, that's what architecture at its best can do. It can make something feel inevitable. In this case, not because it imitates the landscape, but because it has been patiently honed into existence by the human hand.
Yeah, there we go again. So I can hear you all thinking, right, like this sounds a bit crazy. How do you actually even build or construct a project like this in India? So we thought let's show that to you through this one project called the Lura House. Now quickly the context. Hyderabad, it's a city in the south of India. It's a tech city. Google, all these big offices are there. And it's famous for, well, if you're a foodie, then it's for biryani. But otherwise, it is famous for these geological marvels that are speckled with these ancient rock formations that are speckled around the city, granite boulders in the most unassuming of sites. And the site that our clients bought has one of those right in the middle of it. Mostly with development, and you can see that in the city, these boulders get blasted away. But we consider this as a very precious present. So this house is of 2,000 square meters, spreads over 4 floors. The upper floors are shaped like a 4-clover leaf to allow light to enter deep into the center of the house. And now what's quite unique about building in India is that the architect's role doesn't end when the drawings are done. Right? It's an incredibly hands-on process. The drawings are never final. There's a straight line, this always shifts. Things evolve on site. And that can sometimes be frustrating because you risk losing control over the purity of an idea. But over the years, we've also learned that it can open up new opportunities. Because when you bring artisans, the mason, the carpenter, the metalworkers that you all see on the screen, into this conversation, and you design the process so that it allows for discovery, then unexpected things start to happen. Problems turn into inventions. And that collaboration that brings character to a project in ways you could never have drawn or imagined in advance. Now we always begin with small models, sometimes at a small scale to understand light and form and to communicate the project with builders. But clients don't always understand the scale of a model, right? So we did also a 1:1 line out marking of the 2 main floors, and then we walk the client through the house in real place. They could see the sequence of spaces, their bedroom, the size of their beds, and how they would move from one place to another. And of course, we made a few minor alignments, and then we lined it out on the site itself. Now, the excavation at the Lura house turned into a design exercise as well. You don't know what you're going to find underneath. So we followed it very closely from our Mumbai office, city in Hyderabad, 2 hours away, improvising as the rock surfaces below revealed itself. The boulder, which first felt as a kind of an obstruction, became actually a sculptural element, almost like a collaborator. And we looked at Chilida's work to find a clue how we could deal with this kind of odd form of the boulder. It became a dialogue between mass and space. And then we explored the tension between solidity and void, and between carving and containing. To make this, we first created a digital 3D model using drone-based 3D scanning with photogrammetry. And then we made little foam models, and we carved and sliced through this boulder, tried various options, and tunneling this curved passage that connects the home on one side and this home office on the other side of the boulder. And the curved passage created a sense of discovery in that in-between space. Now, lining out this carving on a boulder wasn't easy through drawings. So the idea was to actually start carving from 2 sides to save time. But it also meant we had to meet exactly in the same place. So we used laser tools to measure this, aligning it with the plan of the building. And here you see then the masons starting to slice layer by layer. And they used grinders to reduce the risk of the boulder splitting in 2 halves, and that was really a big concern. And then they started hacking off the pieces, piece by piece. And then eventually the 2 masons reached right exactly in the same spot. And then we flamed the surface of the rock to get a more natural look. And this render shows the kind of ambition we had for this project structurally. To support the big cantilevered slabs, we added these tall stone columns that make the upper floors seem to hover above them. And making these menhir-like columns became a whole project on its own. We first modeled them in 3D, and then with our engineer, figured out the proportions and the stability. And we realized that they were on site, because there was no space on site to do this. So we worked actually on a separate yard with huge granite blocks, around 1.2 by 1.2 meters and 4 meters tall. And because the masons, they carve by hand, we translated the 3D models that we created in the office into 2D elevations, and then created plan slices. We printed them full scale, mounted them onto plywood farmers. And then the stone cutters would chisel, and then they would wrap the farmer around the block and keep carving until the stone fit the outline. Each finished column weighed up to about 10 to 14 tons. And then we craned them upright, refined them, and faceted it, and finally then grinded them down. And then they were transported to site. And then positioned using a double at the center of gravity, held in place with a temporary cage that you see over there. And then before they would be slotted in, they would be rotated precisely before being grouted in. And then here you see it secured into place. And to avoid seeing those steel columns that are wrapping around the building, we customized timber window frames around them. And the slender mullions and vertical posts create a kind of a rhythm, almost like our inspiration was a vintage shopkeeper's cabinet that defines the square meter of the building. We usually make a lot of 1:1 mock-ups because often we, as architects, we are building something for the first time. Our contractors do, and often we also work for the same time together, for the first time together. So here we're testing the bespoke offset pivot hinges that allow this window frame to turn 180 degrees. And this hands-on test and then adjust approach ran through the whole project. We customized, for example, the formwork for the fluted concrete walls, continuing the same fluting profile on the timber paneling and also the AC slots. And then we mocked up the terrazzo floors. But the craftsmen were actually worried about the floor cracking right at that junction where those stiffener plates were located. So we improvised this hourglass detail cut out of brass to cover up a potential crack. And then the slatted veranda screen that was mocked up, and the spacing and depth of the slat had to be just right to balance light and privacy and air, so that it could follow the meandering veranda like a flexible breathing skin. Now, all these samples weren't just like checks. They weren't there just to kind of tick a box, but they were there how the house found its language. One that's as much about collaborating, the making process, as it is about imagining. Now, then something quite different, actually, a school. We built educational spaces before. For example, an outdoor learning center for underprivileged children in Mumbai. And we did a village school for stateless children in Malaysia. But this school was of a different scale. It was a new adventure for us again. Now, and education in India is mostly exam-based, right? It's about memorizing and memorizing and memorizing. But the brief for this competition was very clear: to create a learning environment for the 21st century, but one that's rooted in the local climate and culture. And this is the building tradition of Goa, influenced by the Portuguese. The sloping roofs, the thick white rendered stone walls evolved through material culture and climate, and a formal language that is domesticated by adapting it to the site. And this is a site. With the focus on efficiency, usually schools in India are organized along long corridors. But we decided to create a multi-directional grid plan, punctured by courtyards, adapted to sites. And here a raised running track that connects the two parts of the site, organizing the early years and secondary school in two different zones. The plan is a series of courtyards, not just for circulation, but also for learning. The idea is to make it feel relatable, to make it feel like a village, interconnected, human-scaled, and alive. And you have these deep courtyards that means that there's a lot of shade, which is very welcome in this climate. And we collaborated here with landscape architects and artists to integrate ecology directly in the curriculum. Here the running track, and here how the school relates to the street. And then further east to Assam, to the floodplains of the Brahmaputra River. And this is really an extraordinary place. You see this river that starts all the way into Tibet, and then 3,000 kilometers later it winds around the Himalayas, and then it reaches the Indian Ocean. And here lies Kaziranga, a landscape of immense biodiversity. It's home to the one-horned rhinoceros, wild elephants, and hundreds of bird species. And it's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And with that, of course, comes a huge responsibility. Now, the Brahmaputra floods every year when the Himalayan snow melts. But the floods, they become more intense and unpredictable due to the melting glaciers and climate change. Here in 2014, for example. And then in 2024 again, where the water rose dramatically and entire stretches of land submerged, and wildlife were caught in the middle. Here you see over there in the background the Kaziranga National Park. And then here, our site, just south of that national park, that used to be paddy fields. But today, it's mostly grassland used for grazing, with the occasional elephant wandering through. And if you don't notice, that's my foot, but that's an elephant. These are elephant feet over there. So our challenge was clear, right? How can we design a resort that contributes to the ecology of the site while staying safe and dry through the floods? And we began by treating the landscape as our primary material. We sculpted the terrain, excavating and filling selectively, to create a series of high grounds and wetlands, ensuring that essential areas stay dry while the rest of the land can flood naturally. And the master plan grew out of this hydrology. A network of elevated walkways and pavilions, almost like a floating village. Here the upper floor. The built footprint is compact, leaving most of the site untouched, open for rewilding. And the main building is lifted on stilts with a pebble-shaped plan that bends and disappears around its edges. And at eye level, it never presents as a solid block, as a solid square block. Instead, it seems to dissolve into the landscape, reducing its visual weight around the corners. And there's a mix of materials, concrete, steel, bamboo, timber shingles, and stone, chosen for constructability, sustainability, but also for their familiarity to the craftsman and their ability to age gracefully in this humid, flood-prone climate. The structures are designed to breathe, to shade, and to collect water. They host not only people, but also birds, insects, and amphibians. And we've been working with ecologists to restore the original grasslands and wetlands, introducing microforests and nesting points. And over time, we hope the site itself will become a functioning ecosystem, a porous threshold between wilderness and hospitality. So here, while the plan is very expressive in its form, it's less about form and more about performance. It's about what buildings can do, how they can guide water, shadow, light, animals, and people. Well, and at this point, usually people ask, right, why do you actually even live in Rotterdam? So it's much more exciting over there. But then I recently stumbled upon this term, hemmablind, right? It's a Swedish term that translates as home blindness. And it kind of speaks for itself. It refers to the concept of getting so accustomed to one's home that you fail to notice its flaws or its strengths. And we wanted to test what happens when we put ourselves in a new context again. What would we notice, and would we see things differently? And it's not necessarily about using our learnings in Europe, but it's more what we would learn anew. The Soul for Trees retreat in the Ardennes near Bouillon is one of the first of those explorations. It's a site right on the edge of the Arboretum of Bouillon, wild, sloping, and wrapped in a forest. And from one side, you look out across the valleys and the ridges, and from the other, you are completely enclosed and protected by trees. And of course, nearby is just a 2-minute walking distance is the 11th century fortress of Bouillon. It's this incredible structure that seems to grow out of the rock itself, which led us to examine this idea. How can a new building connect to that history and at the same time to the land it sits on? And that question became the essence of this project. We imagined a modern interpretation of a stone watchtower, not one that watches over the forest, but one that really becomes a part of it. The tower sits on a steep slope, and from it extend 2 long arms, bridges that reach out into the terrain like anchors or like roots. And they allow the tower to open up at different levels, so 3 of the 4 floors connect directly to the ground. And you can enter from the top, from the middle, or from below through the forest. It's not a building with a front and back, it's more like a living thing, meeting the landscape in multiple ways. It's very small, just about 5.5 by 5.5 meters. But it feels expansive because every space opens to nature. And from the upper road, you see the top of the tower hiding between the trees. And then you walk along a bridge and see right through the building to the forest beyond. And then from the forest part, you arrive at another bridge, flanked by thick stone walls that lead to a warm, open room with a fireplace and inbuilt seating. The walls are cladded in the local Ardennes stone, which is the same stone that is used in the Bouillon castle. And over time, we hope it will weather and grow moss and quietly merge with the forest. And we are kind of interested in this sense of nostalgia, the sense of protection, of belonging, of being shaped by the lands. But nostalgia is as much about remembering as it is about forgetting. And by remembering a filtered past that makes us feel like we belong, it provides awareness of our current times. And as Wim Wenders said, nostalgia is perhaps less a refuge in the past than a healing in the present. Those who see nostalgia as a naive escapism, as a sort of an auto turn off or something. So those who see nostalgia as a naive escapism may themselves harbor a naive faith in the future or in change itself, a kind of an extroverted need for a novel experience that sees nostalgia as dreadfully inward. But nostalgia is neither negative nor neurotic. And we think it's eventually therapeutic. It's less an escape from problems than a source of continuity and identity that can enhance our ability to face them. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Oh, you.
We're going to share
this
that.
one. Okay, good.
Wow. Thank you very much to share your adventures with us. I still need some time to come up with a good question, but in the end, I was really struck by what you were saying about the concept of Hemma blind, and maybe you can say a few more words about that, because I understood about it that if you are too long at home at a place, then you don't see its flaws anymore. So then it could be a good thing to remove yourself from that home to look at things anew. But I was so I was wondering the reason for you to come to set your new base in Rotterdam. Is it really about avoiding Hemma blind?
Does it? Yes. So I'll maybe go back a little bit, right? Because when we started off in India, at least I'm speaking for myself now, starting to work in this culture that I didn't know. I mean, I'd worked in Sri Lanka for a little bit, but it's a different story. And in India, we started to practice. We got a project to design a house, the first house that we showed. And then you are thrown into the depth like this. You have to figure out how do you construct a house like that, right? And I spoke a little bit about this as well because maybe you start designing there. You start figuring out that things work differently. We had this idea, for example, you saw it in the house, to create this beautiful tin steel mullion-framed windows that are wrapping around the house. There was no company where we could buy them, right? So we then said, okay, let's maybe buy the sections that make up these, and then we make our own windows. But these sections were not available, so we had to go back to the most basic of all, a simple L angle, and then make sections from there. And then we had to figure out a way to make it to make it anti-rust. We started hot dip galvanizing them. Then they started bending in the hot dip galvanizing machine. They came out all bent, and we had to learn a lot in the process for even the most simple, basic things that you would think of, making a window frame. And it started sort of like, okay, well, maybe there's something there, but it also wasn't a kind of something that pulled us down, right? Because a lot of time went into it. It's not for nothing that we have 50 people working on these few projects. So, but then you come back to the Netherlands, and then you also realize what kind of value this actually can give you. And we were aware of that, but coming to the Netherlands and understanding more how the building culture also evolved here over the last 20 years, it does then give you a better look on how the experience in India has been.
Okay, so it's about then looking back what you have gained
Yes.
in your architectural knowledge, but but I also have the feeling that you are really also from an adventurous point of view always seeking to step outside the safe space of home and looking for challenges and solving them every project at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know which way it is, whether they find us. I don't think we are particularly going and looking for the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
I think most often, people also start to recognize us as a practice that can work in, that is agile and can work in different contexts and locations. And often we are approached for things that we are surprised about, and because we have no prior experience in building like this. And I think coming back here, I think there was no set experience. We came very open. We didn't have any projects or an office or any work here. We had our projects in India, but indeed there was this curiosity to see where it would take us, and we started an office with one, and now we have two. And then again, I think we had two projects that found us, and I think that's nice that we get to start exploring again from a scale that we first started in Mumbai with like the first house we built was 300 square meters, and we are building now again very small here and learning from that from the beginning.
Yes, yes, again. What does BRIO mean?
Yeah, so I think we wanted a neutral name. Also, Robert's name is really difficult to pronounce in India. We never get it right, so we knew the practice cannot have
surnames
our names.
was not an option. No.
We liked what BRIO stood for. It stands for energy and vitality, and to do things with passion. And its origin is it's a Latin word, and yeah, and that's where it came from.
Okay, good choice. Does anybody want to pose a question or comment? Oh.
Okay, so the typology you worked in India, it's almost luxurious, and here, I mean, the typology is, I would say, very limited in Netherlands, because how I see Dutch architecture is very pragmatic. So how do you bridge that gap? Because I come from India, I have worked on projects in India, and it's an extravagance in India, which is, here it's very pragmatic. People are not going to build a 5 BHK apartment or even think about all these things. They want, I mean, we are in housing crisis, so it's of whole different scale, whole different typology. So how do you bridge that gap?
Well, of course, it's a very good question, actually. And I hope that we have also shown the kind of diversity of our work, and that it actually branches across all these different spheres, from the most luxurious to the most basic. And for us, the idea that you work with typologies and you work in a different landscape. Maybe you can just ask your question again, because then I can just respond to it a little bit better. Yeah? Oh. Yeah?
So I would say that even the smallest building in India would be considered quite extravagant in the urban fabric of Netherlands.
Right.
Yeah, so in India, having a, I would say, 70 square meter apartment is considered, I mean, less than minimum, but here it's considered as something very good.
So there's a big difference between when you talk about constraints, right? And the constraints that you find in India and the constraints that you find here in the European context. And when we talk about constraints in India, actually, from a regulatory point of view, can do anything, right? There's nothing that stops you. Okay, maybe in the cities you have to build an FSI and all that. You don't do a lot of things in the cities, you would understand. The project in Lura House, right, this house in Hyderabad, this is definitely designed according to regulations, obviously. But other than that, it's a blank canvas. Right, and within that, you can go in many different directions. But what is the constraints is the pragmatism, and that's what your question was also about. Like if you work in an environment like Kaziranga, in natural surroundings, what is your response going to be like? And that could potentially be anything, but it also does kind of start limiting to, if you have a certain approach or a vision or a certain attitude towards your work, that becomes then automatically it leads to a certain type of architecture, at least according to us. Here you may have much more a regulatory framework that defines what you do, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of creative architects here in the public, right? There's a lot of possibilities here as well. So it comes really from a different kind of point of view of where and how you start making choices.
All right. I do quite a bit of work in India.
Oh, fantastic.
On a more urban scale, actually,
Yes.
quite outside of where you probably are, have you shown least of your work. But I was very interested to see, with such an amount of capital, such a fast and rapid urbanization, where do you think, what is the sort of future production of architecture that we can expect from India? And I know this can be a 2-day, 3-day, a week-long congress, but it's very interesting to see, what happened with China and its production of architecture over the last decades, and India now facing 400 million people moving to cities in the next 20, 25 years. Enormous amount of smart people. Where is this going? I know CEP University a bit. It's a beautiful campus. You showed your work. So what are some of the strands that you see emerge, or the opportunity that you see emerge?
You want us? Okay, so you mentioned China as well in 2010s, 2006, around that area. There was a lot of optimism in China, and actually when I talk to people who have worked in that period, when they come to India, they see a lot of similarities. It's sort of at that beginning moment where you see all that bubble and that energy coming, and a lot of interest from global markets. But I would really want to be cautious about taking direct parallels, because they're very diverse. They're very different countries, and they work on and operate on a very different political system. And where there's a lot of ambition spoken about to politicians about the public spaces and infrastructure of India. Architecture, not so much. I think that ambition does often stay only at the infrastructure level, and very rarely translates into actual architectural projects. We haven't seen it yet. I think it's going to probably take a long time for that actually to happen, similar to what happened in China, right, where public commissions are tendered, large-scale projects are being floated, and competitions are held. These do not really happen in India yet, and the way the political system is organized, they are unlikely to happen either. So I do see that the interesting work, unfortunately perhaps, does stay within the private realm, in the place where private individuals or corporates with maybe some amount of public interests are investing into public infrastructure, and there potentially you could start seeing something that becomes very interesting.
Yeah, I think especially with private developers housing in Mumbai, that it is more seen now that it is design-led, that there are architects that are design-conscious, that are working with developers, which earlier didn't happen because it was all about maximizing the floor space and how quickly you can build. But there is more material exploration, there's more consciousness on sustainability, on longevity of these buildings, and there's a lot more focus on design.
So it lacks a framework, so to say, where buildings in a larger scale can, let's say, work together to create let's say the surroundings that you are now creating, one building at a time in a very specific, quite private place. So is that it? It lacks maybe lacks sort of the public to have a sort of potential for public space as well. These
it does. I don't know of any public library which was built in India for the last 15-20 years. Not a large one for a big city like Mumbai. Doesn't exist. Not even a small neighborhood one. If there's a small neighborhood one, it would be a small, like a private individual who renovates an apartment and makes a library out of it, which are all amazing bottom-up initiatives. That's where you see potentially things coming up as well, yes. When it comes to public space. There's a high-speed railway line planned to come to Mumbai. I know the person who's worked on the project. It was a very ambitious project right in the middle of the city. The station is coming. The beautiful, large, 100-meter deep public square got removed, slowly eaten up by developer interest, and now the station will end up right on the street like all other stations. So that's where my sort of let's say concern arises from these kind of developments. No, I want all these three to have a question.
Okay, I think the first one who raised the hand was back there. I'm sorry. Then you should ask the question in a more informal setting later.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us and what I could only describe as dream projects and dream sites for people who worked in India. My question is about affordability of construction in India and also getting the chance to be so creative and custom build all of these beautiful details with, the handrails and the door frames, all of that. Does it come with the affordability in labor, and is that something that you also experience here? And, is creativity cut down because labor is not that affordable in the West? And how do you deal with that?
You want to answer or Well, it's very relative, affordability. And I think we spoke a little bit about it also, right? When we spoke about the Himalayan mountain home, the crafts, the making of these large timber beams, the standing seam roofs, the stonemasons that were cutting slowly, block by block. It's labor intensive, a lot of man hours go into it. And of course, the daily wages of these laborers is low. It's enough for them to make a living. They have a wonderful family at home, but their sons, they don't want to do this work anymore. They move to the city to have different jobs where they earn more money, or they have a better future, or they have better hospitals, for example. So you see craft slowly disappearing, and you also see that craft becomes more and more unaffordable. And of course, some of these projects that we worked on are very high budget, but some of the other ones, like the first one, for example, it's a very low budget project, and still yet with sort of, I guess, invention and working with very simple means, like an L-angle mild steel piece, you can eventually create these kind of things. It means there's a lot more time also goes into the designing of it, right? So it's also our, let's say, if we talk about labor as architects, that is also an important factor. But like I also said, sometimes it is a burden. Like you would rather just kind of skip a lot of steps and just sort of get on with it and go to the point that really matters. You can spend your time on more the ideation of a project rather than the execution of it. The amount of hours that go in our office into calling the contractors, following up, is the sand arrived on site, is the sand sieved properly, is there no impurity in it? These are all things that we as architects have to do that we would rather not do. But
it's not always a choice it's not always a choice that we want to handcraft and hand make each piece, but sometimes there is no, like the brass windows in the Alibag project, we would have happily bought them, but there are no brass windows that are readily available, and we wanted a material that would again age and patinate and not something that would necessarily need to be will rust or will have to be maintained over time, and that's why we chose brass, also because of the shape of the arches, that it's a material that can be bent easily. So it's not always something that that we choose to do. It's more often that and it doesn't mean that creativity here will be stifled because you can't hand make things. In fact, like Robert said, maybe you can spend your time more efficiently on other aspects of the project that don't have to be so intensive.
Okay, thank you very much. I really like the way that you spoke about your projects, really about what you're trying to achieve, let's say, in sense of atmosphere and the way materials and the surrounding is sort of integrated in the whole experience of place. And yeah, for me it was really, and I think also everybody who was here in the room shared that experience. And thank you for sharing your stories with us.
It was really nice.
And we will continue at the bar, and
okay.
they can be approached for more questions later on.